Hey, what's going on, Guardians? My name is the Black Link, coming back at you on May 27th, 2021, the final Thursday of the month. And you all know what that means. It's time for this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly blog, This Week at Bungie. And this TWAB is dropping after a monumental, and I'd say mostly successful weekend of the initial release of the Vault of Glass in Destiny 2. That raid from D1, the classic, the original for Destiny, came out. It was a lot of fun to play. We got to see an awesome world's first race. Yours truly was even able to complete it in time to get that raid ring. And indeed, the legends of the Vault of Glass is where we start this week's TWAB at. Because of course, the world's first race was won by Clan Elysium, who took home the gold by defeating the Vault of Glass not only once, but twice and with challenges active. And Bungie starts off this week's TWAB by doing a great in-depth interview with that entire clan, talking about their mindset, their training, everything that went into the world's first race last weekend. There's some really interesting insight in there, and if you'd like to check it out, of course, we'll have a link to the TWAB in the description box below. But again, mass congratulations to Clan Elysium. You guys did a great job, and you've cemented your legends in time. But following that section of the TWAB, we got a major revelation about some huge stasis changes that are going to be coming way sooner than you might think. This section started off with Bungie Sandbox lead Kevin Yanez, who gave us a deep dive on Bungie's perspective when it comes to Stasis, some of their decision making when it came to creating that subclass, what they're looking for in pushing that subclass further, and also how they're going to be dialing it back a little bit to help out in the PvP environment. Your cries of broken Stasis subclasses have not gone unheard, as Bungie has been working on some major Stasis changes, most importantly some major Stasis nerfs that were originally scheduled to drop next season in Season 15. But instead, we're getting them in a hotfix next week, which I think has caught most Guardians completely by surprise. These changes will be a part of hotfix 3.2.0.3, scheduled to go live next Thursday, June 3rd. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive on in. First up, we've got some general changes for Stasis as a subclass. For the freeze, they've reduced the duration of all non-super freezes versus players to 1.35 seconds. And they note, this freeze is too short to break out of, so breaking out is now only possible when frozen by a super. They've also reduced special weapon, heavy weapon, and light ability bonus damage versus frozen players from plus 50% to plus 5%. Major nerfs for the way Stasis is going to be interacting with you there. You're now going to be breaking out much faster, and you'll only be stuck in place whenever you get hit by a Stasis super. And man, that change to the weapon damage there is going to be massive, since you're basically going to be dealing a tenth of the damage that you were dealing to frozen targets now. We're actually going to double up on that nerf a little bit later on. Next up, we've got changes to the way Stasis slows players. When this update goes live, Stasis Slow will no longer reduce weapon accuracy, now it increases weapon flinch when under fire, and it no longer suppresses class ability and air moves including Icarus Dash. Now they do note that Stormcaller's Ionic Blink is still going to be suppressed when slowed. They'll be addressing that in a future update. And they've reduced the movement speed penalty while slowed by 20%. After that, we've got some changes to aspects and fragments. First up, Whisper of Hedrons is seeing a huge nerf. When this update goes live, Whisper will no longer increase weapon damage after freezing. Instead, it now increases weapon stability, aim assist, mobility, resilience, and recovery after freezing. This is a major change that I wasn't exactly expecting. I kind of wish they wouldn't do this. You're getting a lot of trade-off here. You're getting increased stability, aim assist, mobility, all that kind of stuff. It's almost kind of like the benefits you get from Killing Wind. But man, I wish we could keep that weapon damage. Just make it a PvE only thing. Ugh. But anyways, we've got plenty more to cover. Whisper of Rhyme Fragment no longer provides overshields while in your super. You've probably been noticing a lot of that with Mayhem going on right now. Next up, we've got changes to Cold Snap Grenades. Seekers no longer track targets after initial target acquisition. Oof, hurts as a warlock. increased arming duration before Seeker spawns from 0.3 seconds to 0.8 seconds. They've reduced detonation radius versus players from 3 meters to 1.5 meters, and it now bounces off of walls and detonates on the ground. Then we've got some changes tailored to the 3 specific subclasses. Starting, of course, with the one, the only Titan Behemoths. Bungie even notes here that Behemoths generally have the highest win rate of any subclass in most 6v6 game modes, and is also among the strongest in 3v3 game modes. And so, they're going to be making a few changes. First up, we've got Shiver Strike. They've reduced flight speed and distance. They've reduced knockback versus players, and they've removed the slow detonation on player impact. Then we've got changes to Cryoclassum. Now requires the Titan to sprint for 1.25 seconds before activation when not in your super. And they've removed the cooldown. So a little bit of good, a little bit of bad. After that, we've got changes to Howl of the Storm. They've reduced the angle of initial freezing/damage cone. They've reduced the crystal creation freezing radius. They slow down sequence of crystal formation to allow victims more opportunity to escape. And finally, now spawns a small crystal on walls if performed into walls. After that, of course, we've got changes to Glacial Quake itself. They've reduced the heavy slam vertical freeze range versus players, good, and they've reduced damage resistance from 50% to 47%. Closing up a full slate of nerfs inbound for the Titan Behemoth. After that, we've got the changes coming to Hunter Revenants. First up, for Withering Blade, they've reduced the slow duration versus players from 2.5 seconds to 1.5 seconds. They've reduced Whisper of Durance slow duration extension versus players from 2 full seconds to 1/2 second. Major nerf there. They've reduced damage versus players from 65 to 45. Glad they're specifying PvP there. And of course, after 1 bounce, this is further reduced to 30. They've reduced the projectile speed by 10%, and they've reduced tracking after bouncing off of a wall. So no more easy bank shots with Withering Blade. For Winter Shroud, they've reduced the slow duration versus players from 2.5 seconds to 1.5 seconds, and they've reduced Whisper of Durance slow duration extension versus players from 2 seconds again to 1/2 second. Finally, of course, for Touch of Winter, Cold Snap Seekers no longer have increased movement speed or travel distance, and Cold Snap Seeker now spawns a small stasis crystal on detonation. Now, of course, I might be a little bit biased here, but I think they could have skipped the next section. I feel like Shadebinders have already gotten nerfed enough. But let's dive into what's changing with the Warlock subclass. First up, Penumbral Blast. They've reduced tracking and proximity detonation size and tracking versus players, and reduced freeze radius versus players when impacting the environment from 2.7 meters to 1.5 meters. After that, we've got changes to Ice Flare Bolts. Seekers now only chain once when spawned from a player shatter, so you can't chain those past just one player anymore. Again, glad they're specifying PvP here. That's one of the better parts of this thing in PvE. And finally, Winter's Wrath. Freezing projectile tracking strength now ramps down to 0 after 2 seconds of flight. So these things aren't going to track you across the battlefield anymore. Bungie goes on to say that they hope these changes have a positive impact on your Crucible experience. While the gameplay team is very busy working on future releases, Crucible and the PvP community are incredibly important to us, and we'll continue to monitor gameplay data and community feedback regarding Stasis and subclass abilities in general. We'll continue to update Stasis until its win rates and usage rates are in line with the light subclasses. So expect more updates in the future. And there we go, major changes coming to the way Stasis is going to work, primarily in the Crucible. And I would say there's probably a lot of PvPers out there who are screaming cheers of joy. Stasis has been an oppressive force in the Crucible since Beyond Light's release, and I'm glad to see that Bungie is dedicated to making some changes to putting a bit more equity between the subclasses there, the light subclasses, and of course Stasis in the future. Really happy to hear about some of these changes. Cannot wait for them to go live next Thursday. But that's not where the TWAB comes to an end this week. This week, of course, saw the release of the new weekly pinnacle activity, Expunge, and it's a lot of fun. Well, the TWAB brings forth senior designer Mike Profeta to talk a bit about the future of Expunge and some of the rewards you'll be earning from it. Here's basically what he had to say. For the next 4 weeks of new expunge missions, players should expect to earn a piece of high-stat seasonal armor in addition to some decrypted data on their first time through each mission. Once players have earned their high-stat armor by completing the first 4 missions, remaining weekly expunge missions upon first completion will reward a seasonal weapon with an additional perk choice in the final column instead of an additional armor piece. Starting on June 15th, a new Pinnacle Activity Challenge will roll out connected to expunge missions, providing an additional Pinnacle reward source each week for the remainder of the season. This coincides with an additional layer of replayability being introduced to expunge missions, along with unveiling the final 3 Splicer Gauntlet upgrades, which will provide additional rewards and a source of high stat / double perk seasonal gear from expunge each week for as long as the activity is available to players. So there we go. A lot of people were a bit concerned about the removal of high stat seasonal gear from the season pass. I'll even admit, I wasn't too big a fan of that either. So I'm really happy to see that they're explaining that that's going to be a part of the expunge missions that we're going to be doing on a week-by-week basis, and that's going to be opening up later on, starting June 15th, with a different Pinnacle Activity Challenge that is going to give you further Pinnacle rewards and also serves as an additional avenue for seasonal gear, high stat gear, and of course, seasonal weapons with additional perk options. That's okay with me. Great way to keep me playing the expunge activity. But alright, Guardians, that's pretty much it for the biggest bits of news contained in this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly blog, This Week at Bungie. There's a lot of really great information about Stasis changes that, again, is going to be coming next week. This was supposed to be coming next season. Bungie's pushing it out next Thursday. So if you're somebody out there who's sick of Stasis in PvP, well, your time to jump into the Crucible is next Thursday. But alright, Guardians, that's the news and those are my thoughts. Be sure to leave me yours down in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest stuff we're putting out. But for now, thank you all so much for watching. And as always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty.